Welcome to Fierce Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you could join us today. Now let's dive right into the story. Lenora Ashby's husband and his 26-year-old girlfriend were standing in the warm glow of the kitchen. Lenora had renovated herself, tile by tile, laughing over takeout containers and a bottle of wine that had been a wedding gift, while Lenora stood on the back deck of her own house in the November dark in her socks, watching them through the glass sliding door that now had the interior latch flipped shut from the inside. Cassidy. That was the girlfriend's name. Cassidy Vane, a junior associate at the architecture firm where Lenora's husband Mitchell worked, had actually leaned across the kitchen island and flipped the latch herself. She had done it slowly, deliberately, with a little smile that she directed straight at Lenora through the glass. Then she had turned back to Mitchell and said something that made him laugh, and he had not looked back at the door even once. They thought they had just reduced a 41-year-old hospital administrator to a weeping mess on her own back deck. They had no idea that the house they were standing in, the house with the Muskoka stone fireplace and the heated floors and the wraparound porch that Mitchell had bragged about at every dinner party for 6 years, was not, in any legal sense of the word, his. They had no idea what Lenora Ashby was actually capable of. The cold in Cobourg in mid-November is a specific kind of cold. It comes off Lake Ontario sideways, and it gets into your joints, and it is not polite about it. Lenora stood on the composite decking in her wool socks, her breath clouding in front of her face, and she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what had just happened. It had started, as these things often do, with a number that did not add up. Lenora had been reviewing the household budget, something Mitchell usually insisted on handling himself, which she had always found slightly odd for a man who claimed to value partnership, and she had noticed a withdrawal from their joint line of credit. $43,000, moved in 2 separate transfers over the past 6 weeks, to an account she did not recognize. She had brought her laptop to the kitchen, where Mitchell was supposedly working from home, and she had set it on the counter in front of him and asked in a voice she kept very deliberately calm what she was looking at. Mitchell had not even glanced at the screen. He had set down his coffee mug with a deliberate, controlled slowness that Lenora now recognized as the body language of a man who had rehearsed this moment. He had looked at her the way a person looks at an inconvenience they have been managing for too long. "Lenora," he had said, "I was going to tell you this week." She had waited. "I've been unhappy for a long time. I think you know that. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'd like you to give me some space to figure out the financials before we bring in a mediator." Lenora had looked at him. She had looked at the $43,000 on the screen. She had looked at his coffee mug, which had a ring on the bottom, because he never used coasters, no matter how many times she'd asked over 11 years of marriage. And she had said, "Where did the money go, Mitchell?" That was when Cassidy had come downstairs. She had been wearing Lenora's robe, the long charcoal one from the bathroom hook on Lenora's side of the ensuite. She had walked into the kitchen, poured herself a mug of Lenora's coffee, and leaned against the counter with the specific ease of someone who had been practicing belonging in a space that was not hers. "Tell her," Cassidy had said to Mitchell, not even looking at Lenora, inspecting her own nails. "Tell her about the condo." Mitchell had told her about the condo, a 2-bedroom in the Distillery District in Toronto, a 90-minute drive from Cobourg, purchased with a down payment, sourced from the line of credit that both of their names were on. He had presented this information with the rehearsed calm of a man delivering a quarterly report. There was a completed offer. The keys were being released at the end of the month. Lenora had said that money was for the roof repair and Kira's tuition. Kira was their daughter. She was 19 and in her 2nd year of nursing at Queen's in Kingston. Mitchell had said, "Kira can get a student loan like everyone else." Lenora had said, "I want you to reverse the transfers and I want her out of my house." Mitchell had stood up then. He was not a physically threatening man in the conventional sense, but he was large and he used space the way powerful people learn to use space, filling door frames, occupying the center of rooms, forcing the people around him to arrange themselves at the margins. He had come around the island, and he had stood very close to her, and he had said, in a voice that was very quiet and very clear, "This is not your house, Lenora. You work at a hospital. I am a partner at a firm. The mortgage is in my name. I want you to go outside and get some air and come back in when you're ready to have an adult conversation about the division of assets." He had put his hand on her shoulder, and he had walked her toward the back door, and he had opened it, and he had, without raising his voice, without doing anything a neighbor might have seen and called concerning, guided her through it and closed it behind her. And then Cassidy had crossed the kitchen in her robe and her bare feet and had flipped the interior latch. Lenora stood on the deck in her socks, and she counted to 30. Then she walked to the far end of the deck, down the side steps into the side yard, and she went to her car. Her car was a 7-year-old Subaru Outback that Mitchell had twice suggested she trade in for something that didn't look, as he put it, quite so guidance counselor. She got in, shut the door, and sat in the cold leather seat, and she breathed. 11 years. She had given Mitchell Hay 11 years. She had moved to Cobourg from Toronto when he made partner at the Cobourg office because he said the commute was killing him. She had transferred her position at Toronto General to Northumberland Hills Hospital, a lateral move that had taken her 2 years to recover from professionally. She had managed his social calendar and researched his clients' restaurant preferences, and quietly, without ever being asked, absorbed the 10,000 small tasks that constitute a life so that he could present the polished surface of his to the world without friction. And she had done it all while being, to any external observer, a woman of completely unremarkable means. A hospital administrator driving a sensible car. A woman who brought casseroles to the neighbors when someone had surgery and volunteered for the Christmas food drive at St. Peter's and did not wear her family name anywhere visible. The family name was Ashby, as in Ashby Medical Holdings, founded by Lenora's grandfather, expanded by her father, and now a quietly significant presence in the Canadian private healthcare infrastructure with interests in 3 provinces. Her father, Gordon Ashby, was not on any magazine lists. He distrusted publicity the way some men distrust weather. He ran his business through a network of holding companies and property trusts that were almost entirely invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking for them, and who did not know exactly what they were looking at. Lenora had walked away from a position in the family business at 28 because she had wanted to do the work herself. She had wanted to know that the rooms she walked into opened because of what she knew and what she had done, not because of whose daughter she was. She had told her father she wanted a normal life, and he had looked at her for a long moment across his desk in the Ashby Holdings office in Mississauga, and then he had said, "All right, but you'll keep the infrastructure." The infrastructure meant one thing in practical terms: the house at 14 Ridgecrest Way in Cobourg, Ontario. The house with the Muskoka stone fireplace and the heated floors and the wraparound porch had never been Mitchell's. When they had bought it, Mitchell's debt load from the dissolution of his previous business partnership had quietly disqualified him from the financing. Lenora, rather than humiliate him with that information, had arranged for an Ashby property trust to purchase the home outright. Mitchell had been given documents describing a mortgage held through a numbered company, and he had signed them without reading them carefully. Because men like Mitchell do not read carefully things they believe have already been handled in their favor. Every payment he had made over 6 years had gone into a trust account that Lenora's father administered. Mitchell Hay had been renting his own self-image from his wife for 6 years. He did not know this. Lenora pulled out her phone, not the personal one she used for texts and grocery lists and calls with Kira. She opened a secondary secure application on the same device, one she accessed perhaps 4 times a year, and she pressed the contact at the top of the list. It rang once. Lenora. The voice was dry, unhurried, and about as warm as the Lake Ontario wind, currently audible outside the Subaru. It belonged to a woman named Margot Pelletier, who had worked for Ashby Holdings for 17 years, and who held the title of Director of Strategic Affairs, which was a title that told you almost nothing and explained almost everything about what she actually did. Margot's had a law degree from Osgood and a previous career that Lenora's father had once described, without elaborating, as government adjacent. "I'm in my car," Lenora said, "in my own driveway." Mitchell walked me out the back door, and his girlfriend locked the sliding door behind me. There was a pause on the line. "Are you physically all right?" "I'm cold and I'm in my socks and I'm not going anywhere," Lenora said. "But I'm done, Margot. I've been done for a while. I want to move." "Define move," Margot said, and Lenora could hear the precise, almost inaudible sound of a keyboard beginning to engage. "He transferred $43,000 out of our joint line of credit. It's a down payment on a Toronto condo for him and Cassidy Vane, who is a junior associate at his firm and is currently in my house in my robe." "Cassidy Vane," Margot repeated. The keyboard paused. "Vane? Yes. She's 26. She's been at Hartfield Whitmore for 8 months. She has a student line of credit that's nearly at its limit. Another pause. She believes this is going to end well for her. It isn't, Lenora said. No, Margot agreed. What are your parameters? Lenora looked at the house. The kitchen light was warm and amber through the window. She could see the outline of Mitchell at the island, refilling his wine glass. She watched him. He moved through her kitchen like a man who owned it. Start with the house, she said. File the emergency property declaration through the Ridgecrest Trust tonight. I want formal documentation of his tenancy status in the hands of a process server before morning. It'll be ready in 2 hours, Margot said. What about the line of credit? Freeze it and pull his name off the joint account. Work with the bank's legal team. Given the unauthorized withdrawals, there's enough for a fraud flag. There is, Margot said. He routed the second transfer through a checking account he opened 6 weeks ago at a different branch. He didn't tell you about that account. He didn't. That makes it cleaner, Margot said, and Lenora heard the particular quality of that word, the professional satisfaction of a problem organizing itself into clear categories. I'll have the bank compliance team flagged within the hour. That account will be frozen by midnight. What about his professional situation? Mitchell was a partner at Hartfield Whitmore Architecture. He billed himself as a senior partner, though the equity breakdown was something he had been vague about with Lenora for years. What do we know about Hartfield Whitmore? Lenora asked. Ashby Holdings carries the property lease on their Coburg office location, Margot said. We've held that lease for 4 years. It renews in February. Lenora absorbed this. It won't be renewing, she said. Understood. I'll draft the non-renewal notice for your father's signature. The firm will have 90 days notice per the terms of the lease. Margot's voice did not change register. There's also the matter of the $43,000. Given that he used a joint instrument to fund a personal asset without your consent, we can pursue that civilly as dissipation of marital assets. I'll have a family law colleague file the emergency motion tonight, alongside the property declaration. And Cassidy Vane, Lenora said. She's an employee of a firm whose office lease is held by Ashby Holdings, and she's currently trespassing in a property owned by Ridgecrest Trust. Once the property declaration is filed, her presence in the house is unauthorized. Correct, Margot said. I'll include her in the trespass documentation. Don't contact the police yet, Lenora said. I want to watch first. There was a brief silence that Lenora recognized as Margot recalibrating her timeline without expressing any opinion about it. A property agent will need to physically serve the documentation at the address, Margot said. I can have someone there by 2 a.m. That's fine, Lenora said. I'll be in the car, Lenora, Margot said, her voice shifting by perhaps a single degree towards something that was not quite warmth but was in the same neighborhood. Call Kira tonight, before any of this lands. Lenora closed her eyes briefly. I will. The line ended. Lenora set the phone on the passenger seat. The Subaru's heater was beginning to push warm air into the cab, and she held her hands over the vent and watched her own house sit in the dark quiet of the Northumberland night. She thought about the afternoon, 11 years ago, when she and Mitchell had driven up from Toronto to see Ridgecrest Way for the first time. She had stood on the wraparound porch and looked out at the tree line and felt something that she'd been searching for in the city for a long time. Something still in hers. And Mitchell had put his arm around her and said it was perfect, and she had believed that the feeling was shared. She understood now that Mitchell had looked at that porch and seen an asset. She understood now that she had been, in his particular taxonomy, an asset too. A low-maintenance, competent, well-connected asset with no obvious claim to anything he could be bothered to look up. She called Kyra. The phone rang 4 times, and then her daughter's voice came through, soft with sleep, a little worried the way Kyra always was when her mother called late. Mom? Is everything okay? I need to tell you some things, Lenora said. Some of them are hard, but I need you to know that none of them change anything that matters. Your tuition is fine. The house is fine. Everything you need is fine. Kira was quiet for a moment. Lenora could hear her daughter sitting up in her residence room 3 hours east. What happened? Kira asked. Lenora told her. Not everything. Enough. When she finished, there was another silence, and then Kira said, in the voice she got when she was working very hard not to cry, and succeeding mostly through stubbornness. He walked you out in your socks? He did? In November? In November? Okay, Kira said, and Lenora heard something shift in her daughter's voice. Something that sounded like a door closing on a particular kind of tolerance. Okay, what do you need? Nothing tonight, Lenora said. Tonight, I just need you to sleep. I'll call you in the morning. She did not look at the house again for a long time after she ended the call. She sat in the dark car, and she let herself feel what there was to feel. Not all of it, because all of it was too much for a single night, but enough of it to be honest with herself. 11 years was not nothing. The failure of something you had tried hard at was not nothing, even when you could see, now, that the thing had been flawed in its structure from the start. But the cold on the deck in her socks, that she would not forgive. She looked at the house. The kitchen light was still on. She could see Mitchell's silhouette moving toward the living room. The fireplace glow, her fireplace, came warm and orange through the front windows. She counted down from 5. At 2, the lights went out, not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. The house went from warm amber to complete black in a single instant, the kind of total absence of light that registers as a physical thing, like the air pressure changing. From inside, Lenora's hearing was sharp, and the November night was quiet. She heard the distinct sound of Mitchell saying something loud and unprintable. Lenora had not ordered the power cut. That had been Margot's addition to the evening's program, a subsidiary of Ashby Holdings managing the regional utilities grid, having a routine scheduled interruption affecting one address. The water and gas would follow within the hour. The backup generator in the garage, which Mitchell had installed 2 years ago with great self-congratulation, was a smart unit connected to the home network. The home network was registered to the Ridgecrest Trust. The trust had remotely deauthorized the generator's automatic startup protocol at 11:47 p.m. Mitchell did not know any of this. What Mitchell knew was that his house was dark and cold, and had no running water, and his phone had lost its signal. The Ashby network reach was, her father had once explained to her with what she recognized as quiet pride, genuinely broad, and that somewhere in the driveway was his wife's 7-year-old Subaru with the engine running. It took him 40 minutes to open the front door. She saw the flashlight beam sweep the front porch first. Then she saw his silhouette in the doorframe, the phone light cutting yellow across the front step, and she heard his voice, which had lost its earlier controlled boardroom cadence, and sounded instead like a man who was trying very hard to sound unconcerned and not quite getting there. Lenora. He was looking toward the driveway. Come inside, we'll talk. She did not move. He stood on the front step for a long moment in the cold he had sent her out into, and then he went back inside. She watched the flashlight move through the front rooms. At 1:48 a.m., a dark blue Ford pickup truck with Ridgecrest Property Services, printed on the side, in small, professional letters, pulled to the curb. A woman in a rain jacket got out, walked to the front door, and knocked 3 times with the specific knock of someone who is not expecting to be welcomed. Mitchell answered the door in the flashlight glow. Lenora could see the shape of him. He had found a coat. The woman handed him a document envelope. She said something Lenora couldn't hear. He said something back. The woman said something else. And then she turned and walked back to the truck and drove away, and Mitchell stood in his doorway, holding a large envelope. He stood there for a long time. Then he went back inside, and the flashlight moved quickly, urgently, toward the back of the house where Lenora knew he kept his laptop. 15 minutes later, she saw the flashlight come to the front windows. Then he came out the front door again, moving faster now, and he crossed the porch and came down the front steps and walked toward her car. Lenora pressed the button to lower the driver's side window halfway. Mitchell stopped at the door. He was holding the envelope. His hair was damp. The pipes were out, she knew, but rain or condensation or something had gotten into it. And he was wearing a suit jacket over a sweater in a way that suggested he had not slept and had recently tried to reassemble his appearance and not quite succeeded. He looked, Lenora thought, like a man who had been reliably living in a house of cards and had just felt the first card move. Lenora, he said. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that she had never heard from him before in 11 years. It took her a moment to identify it, because she had not thought Mitchell was capable of it. It was fear. This document says the house is owned by something called Ridgecrest Trust. That's not. We bought this house, Lenora. We signed papers. You signed a tenancy agreement, Lenora said, with a numbered company. Read page 3. The beneficial owner of the property has always been registered to Ridgecrest Trust. That doesn't make any sense. It makes complete sense. Your financing application was declined in 2018 because of the outstanding liability from the Whitmore Group dissolution. I arranged alternative ownership to protect your position. I should have explained it to you. I'm explaining it to you now. Mitchell stared at her. She watched him work through the implications. She watched the moment he arrived at the specific one she had been waiting for. You own the house. The trust owns the house. I direct the trust. He put one hand on the roof of the Subaru. She watched him breathe. The $43,000, Mitchell, she said. You took money from our joint credit to fund a property purchase that you made without my knowledge or consent. Your lawyer will advise you that there are a few names for that. One of them is dissipation of marital assets. Another, given that you routed the second transfer through an account you opened specifically to obscure the movement, is fraud. I can reverse the transfer. Margot has already spoken to the bank. The account is frozen. The funds are under a civil hold. He looked at her. There was no trace remaining of the man who had placed his hand on her shoulder and walked her toward the back door and closed it behind her. Margot, he said. Who is Margot? She works for my family, Lenora said. Your family, he repeated. And the way he said it, she could hear that the word family, as he understood it in relation to Lenora, had until this moment meant her mother who lived in Guelph and her brother who taught high school in Victoria. Your family. You should get Cassidy and collect the things that belong to you, Lenora said. The property agent will be back at 7 a.m. with a formal eviction order. Anything remaining in the house after 9 a.m. will be held in storage at your expense. I have nowhere to go, Mitchell said. It's 2 in the morning. There's a Holiday Inn on Division Street, Lenora said. I believe they take walk-ins. She pressed the button and the window went up. Mitchell did not move for a long time. She watched the condensation blur his shape through the glass. Then the shape turned and walked back toward the front door. And partway up the front walk he stopped, and he stood very still for a moment with his back to her. In the cold she had stood in her socks an hour and a half ago. And she thought that she understood something about him in that moment that she had never quite understood before. That the cruelty was not incidental to him. It was structural. It was the thing he reached for, when he felt the edges of his control soften. He had walked her out in November, in her socks, because it was available to him, and because some part of him had needed her to feel the cold and the humiliation of it, needed to see what it looked like when she registered, how completely he held her comfort in his hands. He had been so certain that he held it. She watched him go inside. 20 minutes later, the front door opened again, and Mitchell came out with a duffel bag. Cassidy came out behind him in a coat over Lenora's robe, which she had apparently still not removed, carrying her own bag. They did not appear to be speaking to each other. They walked to Mitchell's car, a silver Audi that the firm leased under a corporate account. Margot's would be in touch with Hartfield Whitmore's fleet management in the morning regarding that. And they got in, and the car backed out of the driveway and turned south toward town. Lenora watched the taillights go. She sat in the quiet for a while. The house was dark. The property agent would come at 7, and the locksmith would come at 8, and by noon, the documentation would be in order. She would call the gas company and the power utility in the morning, and everything would come back on. She would call the roofers who had been scheduled for spring and see if they could move the consultation up. She would call her lawyer, her own lawyer, not the family's, the woman she had retained 18 months ago, when she had understood that this was likely coming and had begun, quietly, without drama, to prepare. She would make a proper cup of tea in her own kitchen. But first she sat in the dark car in front of her own house, and she allowed herself the things she had been holding back all night. The feelings she had not let herself have in the cold or on the phone with Kira or during the conversation with Mitchell. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly. It was something more structural than that. It was the sensation of a thing finally being in alignment with the truth of itself. The house belonging to who it had always belonged to. The fiction of Mitchell's authority dissolving back into nothing. The architecture of an 11-year illusion finally, irrevocably done. She had spent 11 years making herself smaller to fit inside Mitchell Hayes' idea of what a wife was for. She had cooked his meals and absorbed his dismissals and quietly powered the entire infrastructure of his life, while he mistook her competence for dependence and her patience for powerlessness. He had found out tonight what the patience was actually for. Lenora Ashby started the car. She pulled out of the driveway of her house, turned onto Ridgecrest Way, and drove through the Coburg dark toward the Lake Ontario waterfront, where the wind was cold, and the water was black, and the horizon was completely open. She rolled down the window. She let the November air in. If this story reminded you that quiet women are often the most dangerous ones in the room, That the woman who cooks the dinners and asks the calm questions and drives the sensible car has often already thought 14 steps ahead of everyone who underestimated her. Then you're in the right place. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. The stories worth hearing are about the women who waited and then didn't.